Hey everyone, welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Picasso, and the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast aims to bring the best stories and tips. Stories and tips from those that truly make an impact within the sport of fly fishing. I'll dig into the past, present, and future of our guests, uncovering their amazing story and journey. Join me each week as I interview a new guest from somewhere around the globe. If you're not yet a subscriber, help by subscribing now so I can attract the most influential guests and sponsors to the podcast. Let's make this the top fly fishing specific podcast available. Today's show is brought to you by the following sponsors. Angler's Coffee, a brand of coffee for anglers by anglers. Owner Joan Monahan grew up fly fishing, and after spending 40 years in the coffee industry, perfecting blend and brew process, he retired to creating a coffee blend and brand for the sport of his passion. Go to www.anglerscoffee.com and pick up a bag of your choice. My personal favorite is the pre-ground caddis blend. It has a perfect balance of body, aroma, and acidity to kickstart my day. Thank you, Anglers Coffee, for supporting the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. We look forward to supporting you and your business. Again, www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish, that's D-U-P-E-A fish.com, www.dupafish.com. Coming soon, but head over now, pre-register, and make sure you are ready to receive all the notices of the great deals that we'll be having coming your way. With years of accumulated DIY, Todd and I have traveled and booked experience all over the globe. We know how hard it is to customize a trip to you and your group's particular needs. We will have a comprehensive list of service providers and guides to help you in selecting the perfect trip for your and your party's needs. Book a trip with us and have the adventure of a lifetime. That's Dupa Fish. www.dupafish.com. Togen's Fly Shop, a family-owned business that focuses on delivering top-notch service on high-quality, affordable products for your fly tying needs. Go to www.togensflyshop.com. That's T-O-G-E-N-S flyshop.com. And pick up the materials you need to refill your fly box. Thank you, Togen's Fly Shop. We really look forward to supporting you and your family-owned business. Again, www.togensflyshop.com. Welcome, everyone, to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. This is your host, Christian Picasso, and we've got a great show for you again this week, this very fine Tuesday. So we've got somebody from the interwebs that's going to join us, Eric Leinenger. And Eric is a guide up in the Northwest, travels all around for fishing, has some great stuff to share with us on steelhead, as well as some pretty amazing carp fishing from what it sounds like. So excited to talk about that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the to the podcast. We live and die by our subscriptions. It helps us get us our sponsors and whatnot and keep the show going. Especially helps us get all these great guests and sponsors in place so that we can really make this what we consider the best fly fishing specific podcast on the web. So please do subscribe and share with your friends. No real house cleaning this week. We're still running the survey for feedback. You can get on that survey by going to our Instagram account and following the link there. Completing the survey only takes a few minutes. And again, if you fill out that survey, you're entered into a drawing for 24 flies from Sven Diesel, amazing fly tyer here in Utah, somewhat located pretty close to me. So yeah, let's take advantage of that and go from there. All right, Eric, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, what's going on, Christian?
We're staying busy here in Utah. It's been hot, triple digit summer here, and the fishing's been good, but we're definitely kind of looking at some of those hoot owl hours, I think, pretty soon.
Oh, man, that's so weird because it's been so cold here in Oregon.
Yeah,
it's been 117.
Yeah, everybody's kind of suffering from this.
Yeah.
Well,
it's nuts, man.
Let's dive into this, man. You and I've chatted a little bit, kind of got caught up from where you've been and what you've been doing, and you got some great stuff going on. I really enjoy your feeds and stuff on Instagram, and have been up through to the shop and checked out some of that stuff. That's definitely got a great shop vibe going there. You've become popularized somewhat on Instagram by some of the antics on some of these storytelling sessions you had on the Friday nights. So that's pretty fun. And I think we got a lot to cover. So we're going to get wrapping here. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good to me, man.
All right. So why don't we dive in with the very basics? Let's hear about how you got into fishing, what kind of drove you, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So, basically the same story as everybody. Somebody showed me how to fly fish. I liked it, and I did it more. Long story short, but it was definitely Dad. He did it to get better fishing. And what I mean by that is he used to take me in like my Oshkosh Bagosh or whatever to like the fancy, ritzy, like gated in communities that had ponds on their golf courses. And then he'd fish. And then when security would come up, he'd be like, "Oh man, come on. I'm just trying to get like, my son's only 5. I'm trying to get him into fishing." And, the security guards would be like, "All right, like if you go over to this pond in the corner, like, no one will see you. You got like 90 minutes. He's like, "Oh, thanks so much." And then they would leave, and then he would take the rod out of my hand and then continue fishing. So
pimping out the boy for the good bucks.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm gonna get something out of having these kids. So that's kind of how I got started, and just kind of continued there. Definitely dropped out like in my late teens, early 20s, just like, partying, chasing girls. I moved to Oregon, and then around like 26 or 27. Just joined Dad again on a trip out to Montana, like a lot of people do. Mm-hmm. And saw a trout eat a stimulator. That was it. Came back, dropped out of college, started fishing every day, just sick for it. I mean, just possessed.
Yeah.
And then kind of lost interest in trout fairly quickly. Where we're located, Portland, there's just not a lot of really good trout fishing in that immediate area.
So I got sick. Let's jump back though. It's funny because, it's a little unorthodox way of getting in, right? Your dad pimping you out for some better ponds and whatnot. This to me, it really sounds like it's shaped your artistic and kind of cultural background as well. Because I mean, I've seen photos of you, and you got the gnarly handlebar mustache, and you got some great ink, and you're all tatted up. You'd be a scary guy to run into in the streets. But then when you start talking, you realize, this is a really kind of solid earth kind of dude. So you feel that had quite a bit of influence on you?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, and I'd have to agree. The mustache thing, that's just a Leininger trait. My uncle's got one, Dad's had one, and I don't know. I never really went about trying to grow one. My first year in Alaska, I didn't shave, and then it just kind of stuck. But no, it definitely kind of shaped the way I go about stuff. In high school, we would wake up early and either go before school or after, and we'd sneak into this reservoir down in California. And we'd have to jump chain link fences and go through orange groves. Nice. And there's giant bass in there and huge crappie. And, we'd be fishing on the dam, and all of a sudden cops would show up, lights through the chain link fence, and they're trying to get the padlock undone. And we're running as fast as we can to get off the dam. And, they're chasing us up over the, chain link fences. And this is obviously way before 9/11. Now I'm sure they just tase you and lock you up. But we did that for years, and I'd tell my dad all these stories and show him all these photos. And like his last year, he was actually a principal of a high school for many years. His last year, I think I was living in Oregon. He's driving into work, and he brought a rod. He's like, I just can't take it anymore. So he just parks like on the side of the road where you absolutely do not park. Like, we had to park a half mile away. We're wearing camo and face paint and stuff. Like, it's stupid, right? And so he just jumps in with like a shirt and tie and like whatever, like in his boxers or whatever, and goes down to the Tules and just starts fishing. And like, yeah, big shocker. Like 10 minutes later, cops pull up, like bullhorn. They're like, "Hey, you in the Tules next to this bug that's parked here, like, get out." So he like walks out all soaking wet, and he's just like, "I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah." And I can't remember if I'm making this part up to add the story or if he told me this part, but the guy was like, "Well, what are you doing?" He's like, this part is true. He's like, "Oh, my son fished this for years. I couldn't take it anymore. I just had to fish it." He's like, but you look like you're going to work. He's like, yeah, I'm going to Poway High School or whatever. And like, I think the cop's kid went there or something like that, or they used to. And so he kind of gave him a pass. He's like, just like, get in your car and get out of here. I mean, what are you doing? So that kind of adventurous spirit of like, yeah, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask permission kind of thing is kind of curated that for sure.
You guys are like the kids from that old movie Red Dawn, Wolverines, fighting off the red curtain.
Yeah,
Meanwhile,
exactly.
your old man is like smoking in the bathroom, hey, we're going to get away with this. I like it. This is good. Good stuff.
Yeah, it's too good at fishing to pass up, so you got to do what you got to do sometimes.
So your pops gets you into it. You guys start fishing, you're hooked. Now you're fishing with your buddies, and then it starts to move more from recreational fishing into your career now.
Yeah.
How'd that transition occur?
Sure. So this is a long story, but I'm going to just make it real short. Otherwise we'll be here forever. But I attended a wedding of a friend's. I showed up and they're like, hey, you gotta talk to this guy, Justin Barry. He's crazy steelheader. And so at this point I'd been, steelheading for like a year or a year and a half, but I was, again, just sick with it. Like borrowing people's cars. I've taken public transportation 3 hours out to the river and fished for an hour and came back. And I sucked. I was probably the worst steelheader on the planet. I hadn't caught one. It'd been like a year and a half. Talked to him for about 5 seconds at this wedding. Then it started. So we kind of had to go our separate ways. 6 or 7 months later, at this job downtown Portland, I get a phone call. He's like, hey, what's going on, Eric? This is Justin. And I'm like, who? He's like, Justin Barry. I'm like, I don't know. Who? He's like, the wedding, Sarah and Daniel, blah, blah. I was like, oh, yeah. Hey, man, what's going on? He's like, hey, we're going to the Bulkley in 2 weeks. Do you want to go? And I'm like, what's a Bulkley? He's like, what's a Bulkley? He's like, this is like the river. This is like in 2009, I think. And I'm like, well, what are you guys doing? He's like, we're going steelhead fishing. I was like, oh, man, that sounds fun. He's like, dude, you're going to get them if you come up here. I'm like, I've been fishing for a year and a half, Justin. Like, don't blow smoke up my skirt. He's like, I'm telling you, if you go on this trip, you're going to catch one. I was like, well, let me call you back. So I hang up. I talk to my boss, Chad. I'm like, hey, man, like, is there any way I could get 2 weeks off to go fish?
Chad's
and he's like,
if you get those flare points out on that vest, you're set, man.
How many pieces of flare are you rocking right now? And he's just like, yeah, man, like, give us like 6 months advance, maybe a little bit longer. And I'm like, yeah, I need to leave in 2 weeks. He's like, yeah, no way. Like, we can't cover that. So I went, I was on lunch break and I went back and I got out of my uniform and I put on my street clothes and I came out and he was kind of like, what's going on? And I'm like, sorry, man, I got to go. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I quit.
Oh,
so that financially not the best choice, but anyways, I was on my way up to Canada shortly after that. And mind you, I've had a 2-second conversation with this dude that's picking me up from the train station. So picks me up from the train station, go to his house. He's like, all right, man, we're going to wake up at 3. We're driving to Smithers. I'm like, all right. Laying on the couch, wide awake, just so excited. Hour later, Justin peeks his head out. He's like, hey, you wake? I was like, of course. He's like, you want to just leave right now? I'm like, of course. So 1 a.m., hop in, jam. I did not realize it was 13-hour drive. So a lot of Tim Hortons to get out there.
Yeah.
And anyways, we got out there. The river kind of was blown out. It wasn't optimal, conditions, but they railed. I caught my first steelhead out there. I caught a few more over the next week. And as we were driving back, I'm just like, man, I would love to guide, up here someday. And he's like, yeah, it's like almost impossible for, Americans to guide up there. He's like, why don't you guide in Alaska? And I had never even thought about Alaska, Christian. I don't know why. It never even been on my radar. And I'm like, you think I could get a job there? He's like, dude, they'll hire anybody. Like, if you got a heartbeat, they're hiring you. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds promising. And I
might be washing dishes, but they'll hire you.
Yeah, exactly, or something, right? So, I applied to, a million lodges. None of them got back to me. I kind of might have forged a little bit on my resume after that, saying I might have worked at a lodge to try to get some.
Gotcha.
To get somebody to call me, and then kind of same thing. Like I'd kind of written off working there, and the owner of this lodge calls me like mid-May, And he's like, hey man, like, it's Mike from Good News River Lodge. We're, somebody dropped out and we need somebody, ASAP. And I had got my job back at my old job at this hotel by Chad, very nice boss. And I'd only been working there for like maybe 7 months again. And I'm like, yeah, well, like, what's the season? He's like, well, it's usually June through September, but we need you up here like in a week. And I'm like, God damn it. I was like,
now you're turning in a TPS report of all TPS reports.
Yeah. Did you get the memo? Yeah. So again, I walked up to Chad and I was like, hey man, and he could like see it on my face. He's like, not again. I was like, I gotta go. So anyways, long story short, again, ended up in AK, never ran a jet boat, never took anybody, guided fishing, never done anything. I mean, I got a million stories I could tell you about Alaska and how, I am not the guy. If something breaks, don't call me. Like if you need a website built or like you need somebody to like edit some photos, like I could probably help. But like if you need somebody to swing a hammer, like that's not me. Like I have no problem admitting that. Like
it's not your forte, and it's all right, man. Some people
mechanical stuff, all that stuff. Nah. So I wasn't much help that those preseasons, but I got my feet wet, so to speak, there, and learned to drive a jet boat and learned to do all the things that guides do up there over the next 9 seasons.
Now, where is that lodge, and were you targeting all kinds of species, or were you primarily trout fishing?
Yeah, sure. So it's in Southwest Alaska. If you're looking at a map of Alaska and you look at Bristol Bay, Good News Bay is the bay north one. It's like 450 miles southwest of Anchorage. When I started out there, like their website, pretty archaic. Everybody I talked to had not really heard of it, except a few people, and they were like, "Man, if you can get out there, the fishing, I guess, it's insane." And so it's the only lodge on a 3-river branch system. So you have no competition. Maybe you have like Mission Lodge flying in once every 2 or 3 weeks, but for the most part, you got no competition. And there's a South Fork, Middle Fork, North Fork. You got all 5 species of salmon. You've got a huge run of Dolly Varden, their sea run. You got silvers, and you got trout, and then you probably got some of the biggest grayling that are in Alaska. We taped one that was 26.5 inches. Wow. My buddy Kyle Sawyer guided our buddy Gene, I think, into it, and it ate a skated mouse. So it's badass.
Yeah.
But
with
yeah,
those puckered lips, that's pretty good.
Those fish are so. I mean, we talked earlier about fisherman-friendly fish, redfish. I think grayling have them beat because I've stuck the same grayling like 5 times and the hook just spit, and it just keeps coming back. It's like, nah, I'm gonna eat that. But the fishing is pretty insane out there, and over the years it kind of just got better. They got rid of the commercial fishing like 6 years ago. They turned the king fishery pretty much into catch and release, besides like jacks. Jacks and the smaller kings people still take, and they take sockeye, but they really try to veer away from taking 30-40 pound fish out of the system. And I just don't know a lot of lodges that have done that, and it's just made the runs like real good.
Well, I'm on their website now. It looks really sharp. Looks good. They got some great footage of some live eats and stuff, and it looks like a really cool location. So
yeah, I mean, their bread and butter is kind of king and then silver season, because they usually get such a huge run of silvers. And I think we're only about 5 miles from the bay that, you're basically throwing pink bass poppers to them and watching these things just T-bone them and backflip on them and sip them like dry flies, and they eat them a million different ways. It's badass. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And so when you were guiding there, were you guiding 2-handed fishing as well as single-handed rods?
So when I got up there, no one spay fished up there. And, Jeff had a little terminology for it, but I'm not going to make the listeners' ears bleed, but not a fan. Nobody, they're all like, it's all about single hand. It's all about single hand. And I can say after, spending a lot of time up there, that river specifically, you're going to catch more fish with a single hand because you're fishing a lot of deeper water from the boat.
Okay.
But there's a lot of cool runs that you can wade fish that having spay rod is just a bunch of fun. So, Yeah, it's definitely become more popular. I would say now during king season, you're probably looking at 30% of the people that come up are throwing two-handers. Some years it could be as high as 50. And they'll fish them out of the boat too, but they really like getting out on the front channel and John's Hole and yeah, just swinging some flies. They're super aggressive. If they're there, you know, you got a good shot at hooking them.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, it was a lot of single hand fishing, you know, over the years.
And it looks like Stephen Craddy, he's somebody I've fished with, fishing reds. You and I both know he's still up there. That's cool.
Yep. Craddy's still up there. So yeah, I was kind of telling you about him. He started out as a chef, skilled chef. You know, cooked it up great, but just kind of lost interest. I think after his first year, wanted a shot at guiding, and kind of a nod to Mike, the owner. Mike actually guided at that lodge for I think 7 or 8 years before buying it, which was really nice to have as an employee, because, you know, on really bad days I could come in and just be like, man, I'm so burnt, like I'm just fried. My clients, although nice, just, you know, I felt like I spent a week out there with them today, and he'd just be like, yeah, well, let me tell you a story that was 10 times worse than that, and you end up feeling better, you know.
Yeah. That's cool. Somebody has some remorse, but is also gonna make you earn your keep. It's admirable for sure.
Yeah, so he gave Craddy a shot, and Craddy's a hard worker, so he put together a program, and kind of became, you know, one of my best friends, Jeff, his kind of right-hand man in building a lot of the boats, welding, doing stuff like that, giving Jeff a lot of help up there over the years. And yeah, it's crazy. You know, he's probably one of my best friends to this day, and same with Jeff. And, you know, we're all so different. He's, you know, half Puerto Rican, half white guy from Florida, and in his 20s. You know, Jeff's no one knows how old Jeff is, somewhere between 30 and 50, I'd say, from Tipton, Missouri, up, you know, old school farmer that is just an awesome guide. And then you got me that's living in Oregon. It's in my 40s, and we just bonded, and yeah, it's a cool, friendship that's going to happen.
Well, now it makes sense with Craddy, because Craddy, he cooked up our boil down in Louisiana when we get on there to fish for reds. So it's all starting to come full circle here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you do quite a bit up in Alaska. You've got a full season under your belt almost, right? And then do you head back? Do you go for a couple more seasons?
So I did 6 full seasons from open to close with those guys, and then I did 3 more where I'd go up for like half the season, so like 5 to 6 weeks. Just got busier here in Oregon, so wanted to, you know, get my programs dialed here a little bit more, and it was hard being up there for, you know, 3 or 4 months every year. So scaled back. They hired me as their social media manager for like 5 years. So I did a lot of that, a lot of shooting up there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you saw the Fly Lords video, but I kind of put that together with Jared to have him come up, and it was really, really awesome working with him and Max. And yeah, super proud of those guys. They're killing it right now. They're making such good stuff.
That's cool.
So I did that, and then I was planning on going up again for August in 2020, and then, you know, COVID hit and just kind of equalized everything.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just worked itself out naturally. You know, I don't think I'll be going to Alaska anymore. Jeff, that was his last year as well. So we still got some of the crew up there doing their stuff, you know, 24/7 up there. But as far as me going back, probably not. There's just so much going down here in Oregon, and it's nice to be around, you know, my girlfriend Skinny Bones and all the dogs and stuff like that. So
right on.
I dig it.
So tell us what's going on down here in Oregon for you. I know there's some changes, and you started your own business, plus you're working at the shop, and let's hear about that.
Yeah. Love working at the shop. You know, I've talked to some guys
let's let everybody know which shop it is. Sorry.
So I work at Northwest Fly Fishing Outfitters. It's on 109th and Northeast Halsey here in Portland, Oregon. And it's owned by a badass named Jack Hagan. And he's a great dude to work for. And I think this is our 27th or 28th year in business. Really couldn't ask for a better boss as far as a guide and somebody that works alongside him. The guy bends over backwards to, you know, accommodate me and the stuff that I'm trying to do. You know, I'm gone a lot, and so it's not easy, but great shop, just old school vibe. Come in there, you know, it's just like I always tell people, look, I don't work on commission. So like, I don't care if you buy it or if you do buy it. Like, we're just trying to get you the best stuff for whatever you're trying to do right now. And so just hitting people with honesty, giving them a lot of information and making them feel comfortable, because even when I started out, fly shops are pretty intimidating. There's all these like, cigarette smoking, bearded dudes, kind of half homeless looking and just burn out. And you get in there and you're like, well, at least in the Northwest, I think some of the shops, as you start moving more east, it's a little more clean cut, and not to knock those guys at all. It's just, I don't know, something about Oregon and Washington. It's cold and it's dark. It's
well, like you guys are miserable after all that, standing in that water all winter, catching 2 or 3 crazy steelhead. It's awesome when you hook them up, but
yeah,
it's like so much time on the water. You're like,
Every time somebody asks me, like, I'd take a client fishing in the wintertime, and no one's ever picked up on it, but maybe I've just seen groundhog too many times. But they're just like, so what's the weather tomorrow? And I'm like, it's going to be dark, it's going to be gray, and it's going to last you the rest of your life. And they're just like, okay, anyway, see you at 5. It's like, all right. But yeah, I worked there. It's, great shop. And so been guiding steelhead for 10, maybe this will be my 11th year. Absolutely love it. Love the casting, the rods and lines. God, the new ones are just, you could teach anybody how to do it in, under 2 hours. They're going to be jacking. Unfortunately, the runs have taken a giant crap. And it's just, who do you want to point the finger at? I'm not going to play the blame game. It's just, there's a bunch of factors out there. And the only thing that's for certain is that they're not getting better.
Yeah.
So, I guided on the Grand Ron for 4 seasons with Troy Detman, awesome dude, awesome human being, and Deck Hogan, spent some time up there with him. And we had just some great times, but just seeing the decline of the fish there, the decline of the fish in the OP, decline of the fish in our local rivers here, it's just kind of saw the writing on the wall. And it's like, man, I got to have a backup plan, because I love, teaching people, kind of education's in my blood, because my dad's a principal, my sister's a teacher, mom worked at a high school. I really enjoy it. Catching fish isn't necessarily the number one thing for me.
Why do you think you enjoyed so much? What is it about it that you seem to take away or get out of it?
I think it's an empathy thing. I mentioned it earlier, and I'm not BSing you. There's never been a worse two-hand fisherman than the guy you're talking to on the phone. I mean, there wasn't anyone worse. You can't be worse than I was. Like, I would have one good cast, then 40 bad casts. I was fishing the fly wrong. I was going at the wrong times of the day. My angles were bad. I was moving either too slow, too fast. The rivers I fished sucked. I sucked. I mean, it was so frustrating. I mean, I had full mental breakdowns. I've picked up rocks that I should not be able to pick up and threw them overhead into the river and just cursing like a European, where they just start cussing and none of the words make sense together. It's just like full Cat 5 rage. That was me for years. And so to be able to take somebody, and they're obviously not at that level, hopefully not, and they're having some issues, or they really want to learn, like they're really jacked on it. They're like, man, I saw this Olympic floor routine ribbon dancing thing this guy was doing in the water. I'm like, oh yeah, spit casting. It's like, I really want to learn. And so to be able to take somebody and take them out and break it down in a way that's so easy to understand, and see them transition, like the years of, knowledge that I have going into them within one day, and then just like having a smile of like, dude, this is Brad. Like, you take somebody out and they jack like a 90-foot cast their first day. I'm not saying it's going to happen every time, but it happens a lot. And they turn around and they're like, dude, did you see that?
Yeah,
like,
the eyes are saucers, right?
Yeah, you're like, you're doing it, know? And it's such a mental game, steelheading, that like, that's what I want to focus on, not catching the fish. We want to catch fish, don't get me wrong, but I want to turn you into a better angler at the end of the day, no matter if it's your first day or your 1,000th day steelheading. I feel like I can take somebody, and if they want to, elevate them to the next level. The guys that catch a lot of steelhead that, they've got a pretty good cast, but, let's be honest, a lot of the guys that we take out, even though they hook fish, they got a bunch of issues, right? But they can get the fly out there and they know how to kind of drive it through the water column correctly. but they can always be better. So guys I've had that are, they're sticks. I'm like, hey, you want to, you feel like working on something today, or you just want to go chase? And they're like, some days they're like, hey, you know what? It's sunny as shit. The water's low. Let's work on some tactics. Or if it's, good conditions, they're like, you know what? Let's just go chase. It's like, okay. So
that's cool.
It's, for me,
that's cool to hear. I mean, I can relate, right? Because I hear a lot of guides talk about, when they're burnt out typically. Gosh, I don't want to do this anymore because I'm tired of just put me on fish, just put me on fish. And that's always the end goal. And I think with spay fishing, you get a little bit of an element of they've probably fished single hand before, or they have some element and they're really interested in that cast. It's not as much about the fish catching element of it at the start, at least. Right? So quite relatable.
When I started out, I had a really slow build of clients because, anybody that thinks they're going to just go out and start guiding, I got news flash for you. Like, if you don't work at a shop, it's going to be real tough to build that clientele, because you literally work at a place that people Google and they're like, hey, I want to go fishing. I'm going to Google this fishing shop. And then they call you and they're like, hey, you want my money to take me fishing? And you're like, yeah, this is easy. Let's go. But the problem with that is people would call and be like, yeah, we want to go steelhead fishing. We're coming from out of town or whatever. And, I'm like, okay, well, I swing flies. I don't indicator fish for steelhead. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, it's fine. Like, we got our own single hand stuff. We can bring it. And then I have to try to figure out how to, describe to them, like, not only do I not have this stuff, but I will not take you on an indicator trip.
Yeah.
Just because it's my day too. Like, I want to be invested in the 9 or 10 hours, however long we're going, and staring at a bobber. And I'm not throwing shade at the guys that do it, because there's some guys that actually really love it, and they're scientists at it. I mean, they've got all sorts of weights and fluorocarbon and tippets and whatever. That's their jam. Not for me. So I passed on a lot of trips. I give, refer them to other guys that do that type of fishing. And so it's really slow, this real slow build of people that would want to try it. And then I would follow that conversation by, you're probably not going to catch a fish, which it's not great business. But I'm like, look, man, if you haven't never done this and you're coming out in January, like, it's already real hard. There's not that many fish. It's really cold. You're probably not going to catch one.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, why do people do it? I'm like, because it's badass.
Yeah. The objective is to learn something here. It's not to necessarily catch fish. That's the icing on the cake. That's the way I would think about it, right?
And I mean, the analogy that I use a lot, which isn't real great in 2021, but whatever, here it is. It's like, you're like in your 20s or whatever, you go to the bar, it's whatever, 9, 10 o'clock, and there's a bunch of like 3s and 4s, maybe there's a couple of 5s, and it could be dudes, it could be girls, whatever's your preference. It's all good. But then, and like, if you go up and you talk to them and you just like be a normal human being and just like maybe buy them a beer and just be friendly, there's probably a good chance that something's going to happen. But that 10 that's there, and I don't mean 10 in just attractiveness. I mean, she's or he's or she's or them, they're donating time at homeless shelters. They are just the nicest person. They're gorgeous inside and out. They're just this epitome of human beings, right? They're probably not going to buy your BS of just being nice and buying a beer. Like, it's going to take a little bit more to get that quality, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're okay with 3s and 4s, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's your game. But if you want to go after that next level type of quality, you're going to have to put some time in. So for me, that really equates to steelheading, because every single person I've ever seen catch and land a steelhead, that's the happiest I've ever seen that person. I mean, when Dad caught his first one, I tell people I did not recognize my dad. I've never seen his face make whatever face he was making. He was just jacked.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so that's what it comes down to is just, do you want to put in the time? If not, cool. Like, go trout fishing, like, go bass fishing, or target fish that eat and that there's a lot of, and you're going to have a good time.
Well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Eric Harmony Leininger laying down the law on how to pick up ladies, gents, whoever at the bar. So Yeah, perfect. No, I get it, man. That is a great analogy. Um, all kidding aside, there is an art to it, and I really appreciate it. I'm not a two-hander guy. I've done it here and there, and I'm a complete hack. I'm probably somewhere in the realm of what you described as you started, and I'm looking forward to getting out there and trying some of that as well. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a really good story about someone that I always like hearing stories about guides who take people out where they're like, oh man, this is going to be a long day, and then you had that epitome like moment in the day where it just changes and they start seeing success, and you're like, and it could be in the smallest amount. Sound good?
Yeah. I think
let's take a break though before we do that. How about that, Eric? Let's take a break. Let's recognize our sponsors, and then we'll come back with that story.
Sounds good to me.
Anglers Coffee. We love fueling your next cast. We've been roasting coffee before coffee was cool. www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish. Coming soon. Pre-register now and get notified. www.dupafish, that's D-U-P-E, afish.com. And Togen's Fly Shop, a family-owned business for all your fly tying needs. That's Togen's Fly Shop, T-O-G-E-N-S, flyshop.com. All right, everybody, welcome back. We've got Eric Leinenger here on the show. Eric, right before we left, I asked you to tell us a story about some of your guiding, your steelhead guiding specifically, or something else that maybe fits the mold that really kind of describes some success stories.
Yeah. So, it can be little things or big things. Somebody that, they finally engage the bottom hand and they're like, oh crap. And they jack it super far or whatever. But one of the stories that really always sticks out to me, and I've told a couple times, is one of those aha moments. And, it wasn't steelhead fishing, but it was two-handed fishing. Mm-hmm. We're up on the Good News. This is quite a few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. And, I was fishing a couple guys. I won't use their names, but they went to the lodge quite a bit. Really accomplished two-handed fishermen. I mean, they'd been kind of all over the Pinoy and Canada and all over Alaska, and just great guys on the boat.
So these guys were two-handed anglers.
Yep.
Primarily.
Yep.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, they would not throw a single hand, so they'd either fish from the boat with their spey rods or wade fish. And when they'd come up for maybe 3 or 4 years, and they were great because when the fishing wasn't good, they were fine. They're like, oh, they're just not here yet. They knew that if the fish were there, us being 5 miles from the ocean in prime water, we would see them, we would get grabs, whatever. So they're really great to have on the boat. They weren't like, we need a fish or whatever.
People don't understand that about Alaska too. It's like the fish follow the other fish. And if there's nothing to follow, then they're not there yet.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why this one was kind of odd. It's the first year I had a drone. And so I was like, hey, can I bring on the boat guys and like just, mess around with a little bit? They're like, yeah, we don't care. So, we go out first thing in the morning, we pull into like one of the best runs on the lower river. There's usually fish in there. We drop the hook, we're sitting there, and within a couple minutes, fish are rolling. A good amount of fish are rolling. And I'm just thinking, man, this is going to be great. And like first cast, they get one. It's like, all right, it's like a little 15, 16 pound king or whatnot. Let it go. And then over the next 45 minutes, nothing. I mean, not a grab, nothing. And we're seeing fish roll. And so, I'm going through, typical guide stuff. Hey, let's change this fly. Let's make the leader a little bit longer. Or let's make the tip a little bit heavier. And we're trying all this different stuff. And the fish are still rolling and nothing's happening. And, I kind of repositioned the boat a little bit this way. I at that point, I thought, on a scale of like 1 to 5, I was maybe like a 2.5 as a guide. I was pretty good. I knew my stuff. I knew my knots. I knew how to set up. We caught fish there before, but
you're going through your repertoire of moves. It's like, here's my moves. Yeah. I'm ticking them off the list, but you're not seeing the results, right?
Yeah, nothing's happening. I'm like, dude, I can see the ocean from here. It's super dark and kind of windy. Like, it doesn't get better than this. I got 2 guys that can fish. What's the problem?
Yeah.
And I just was like, I don't know. Like, I just kind of threw my hands up. I'm like, any suggestions? They're just like, we don't have anything. So we
Well,
ended up
remember
moving.
this, everybody, when you go to sign those papers to be the guide for the summer, because not every day is the glory day, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, people always say like, listen to your guide, but also like, listen to your dudes. Like these guys had fished all over.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I'm the guy, but I'm like, what do you guys think? Like, you got any ideas? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, we had our talk. We're out of here. So we went further down, closer to tide, a little bit shallower water. Fish were moving through. We caught a couple. We saved the day, whatever. Well, I get back that night and, you can't see anything on those drones because you're looking at your phone, screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I popped it on the larger laptop and I'm watching and I couldn't believe what I saw. Luckily, they were fishing kind of a white and chartreuse fly, so it showed up really well, just with the way the sun was, or the light, I guess.
What do they say? If it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use.
Yeah, it's like, and you're not seeing black and blue or anything out there anyways. Pink probably would show up. But so without having like a visual aid or whatever, we were kind of just right of center on hook in this river. And we were casting, basically from river left to the far bank. And what was happening was it was kind of slower water next to the bank and a more defined scene closer to the boat. And so they'd make these nice casts, 60, 70 feet out or whatever. And they're fishing, 15 feet of T14 or something. And they would just kind of lift their rod and move it upstream. Classic trout men, right? Like I see it all the time. Steelhead fishing. I'm like, hey, mend it. And they just pick their Skagit head and move it upriver. Now, if you're not overhead and you're not familiar with tips or whatever, you're like, oh yeah, man, I mended it because your Skagit head is now pointing at like a 70 or 45 where you want it.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happening is you can't mend sink tips. There's no taper to them. They don't float. So when you move that Skagit head, your fly and your sink tip are still either straight 90 across the river, or more times than not, the fly is actually upriver of where your Skagit head is pointing.
Yep. The
The
only way you can mend a sink tip is an aerial mend. I mean, people they don't think about that. And that's either by correcting your cast or actually putting an aerial mend in. But you're right. Once it's in the water, you're not moving that.
Yeah, you could do like a reach cast or something like that. So what ends up happening is that sink tip is sinking sideways. And as it came under tension, it would accelerate that fly downriver and it would make this hard turn. And then it would come tight. And now you're fishing. But at that point, you are more than halfway through the swing. And I would actually see large Chinook as that fly is coming towards them. When it made that turn and swung in front of them, their head would move to the right. Like, it's like, bird flew by your face. It's like, what was that? You saw something move, but it was too quick.
Yeah. Huh.
And so I'm like, oh shit. Like they just never saw it. It was going by them too quick. So I'm looking at this, I'm looking at it. And so I run over to these guys and I'm like, hey, can I get you guys out on the boat tomorrow? Usually we switch up clients or whatever. And they're like, yeah. So I check with the owner and he's like, yeah, it's fine. I'm like, we're going to get him. And they're like, okay. So same song and dance. Next day, bomb out to the same run, set up the same way. And so they start fishing. And I think they stuck one right off the bat. There's one high in the water column or whatever. And then same thing happens, blank, 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 blank. And they're like, so what do you think we should do? And I'm like, I don't think you guys are mending enough. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, what I saw was like you cast, but you're just mending your Skagit head and the sink tip's going down sideways. And so, a nod to them. They're like, so what would you like us to do? I'm like, well, after you make the cast, just like lift the Skagit head off the water and then actually pull your rod towards you. So it straightens that sink tip out. Okay. Yeah. And they're like, all right. So they make a cast and they do like just the most like the bare effort. Right. And I'm just like, guys, no, like way more dramatic. So they strip in, they make a cast, they kind of pull back, but they're kind of like reaching the rod. They're just trying to figure it out. Maybe I wasn't doing a great way to describe it. And I'm like, no, like, I'm like, Mark, you've got to reef that rod back. And so he's like kind of trying, and these guys are like I said, they're good fishermen. Yeah. So I could see the frustration building in them where like, I am getting more frustrated because they're not doing what I think they need to do. And they don't really understand what I am wanting them to do. And so each time they blow it, I'm like, no, like way more dramatic, like get the rod behind you. And so Mark just all of a sudden, he just hands me the rod. He's like, look, I realize we're trying to do something different here, but I don't think I understand what you're trying to tell me to do. And I said, I got to be honest. I don't either. I've never I haven't done anything like this. I'm just telling you that the fly isn't where it needs to be. So he's like, well, just try it a couple times. So, I throw it out, I lift. You actually lift the Skagit and then pull the rod back up river, but you don't want to pull it towards you because it's going to move the fly in. So you lift and then reach out and pull up river. And I had to do it a couple times.
When you say pull, you don't want to pull it in, you mean in river.
Like you make your
from the bank.
Yeah, you make your cast where your rod tip's pointing. That's where your fly lands. Mm-hmm. Lift it vertical, keep it out in the middle of the river, and then pull it upstream to get that belly out of that line, right? And then what you can do is immediately drop your rod tip after that. And so you've actually created slack, which is like stuff, people always say you never want to do spay casting, but this is setting the fly up. So fly lands, lift those Skagit head off the river, stick it way out and pull it. And I'll do it so much that you'll see the whole sink tip straighten out and the fly will actually come to the surface. So you can see that your line is in a straight line. Drop your rod tip all the way to the water. And I'm a counter. I don't know what my problem is. I watch too many episodes of It's Always Sunny, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But so as it starts dropping, I'm counting. And so you're looking at T14, you've got, that stuff, it drops for, 7 to 8 inches a second.
Right.
And so if you take the back end of that 7 inches a second, you would get like a 10 count. So 10 times 7, 70. So you're down 70 inches, right? So you're almost at 6 feet down. Mm-hmm. And so I did that, threw it out, stuck it out, reefed it back, dropped my rod tip, watched that sink tip just dig. And what was happening was that fly was sinking first, followed by the leader, followed by the sink tip, followed by the Skagit. And if you've ever seen, you've cut a fly off and it lands in the water and it's floating down river, it's just kind of undulating and kind of just free flowing. Mm-hmm. But when that line came tight, I like to call it activating. That fly came under tension and now the current blows over that marabou and rabbit and stuff. Yep. And it's alive. It's like somebody set a firework off in front of that fish's face. Yeah. Well, when that thing came tight, that fish freaking climbed on so hard. It was just apparent that this is a big fish. I didn't react. We got our sunglasses on. I'm sure my eyes are as big as, deer eyes. And I look at Mark and I was like, that's what you want to do. And he goes, okay. And I hand him the rod and I go, first reel this fish in. And his expression, I will never forget it to the day I die. I mean, his jaw just dropped,
Yeah.
And so he's telling the other guy, he's like, he's cussing and stuff. He's like, we're here, fishing for 45 minutes. This kid takes one cast, and it wasn't luck. It was just that fly was deep where those fish were at. It floated into the fish's face. Then it activated and then it slowly swung away because there's no belly in that right. Tip or your Skagit.
And you had a straight tight line. So the hookup was a better set and everything else. Yeah.
It was just like everything I thought I knew about swinging flies just evaporated at that point.
Climb the ladder.
And Mark just, every night I hear him telling the story, like in the client, den, and he continued to do that the rest of the trip, and he just smoked him. I mean, he was putting up like double-digit fish every day, and everybody else awesome. Like 3-4 fish. So, anyways, when I came back to Oregon, I started, incorporating that in my winter steelheading, and it just really, there's not enough fish to be like, oh, I lit them up, I got 50, but I started catching fish behind my friends. I had clients, catching fish behind their buddy that day, if they fished that setup.
And so let's talk about that setup. You talked about the tactics and how you were using it and whatnot, but let's get really detailed on that setup too. Like what kind of rod are you using? Reel? What's your line setup like? Let's walk through that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, if there's winter steelheaders out there, like grab a pen and paper because we're about to get nerded out real bad right now. So, obviously I'm biased. I'm a Loomis guy. I think the 7130 Asquith is, to this day, all the rods on the market, that rod blows them away. I mean, every single person I put it in their hand, they're just like, this is the best rod in the market. So whatever, you can take that as a sales pitch, or you can just go cast one and then you can see what I'm talking about. But that thing jams. It does what I need to. And so on top of that, I really like the airflow fist Skagit head. I know, I'm a big SA guy now, and they've got some new lines coming out that I'm excited about. But when this system was designed, it was based off of Brian Sylvie's Fist line. And, Brian, he's a really good fly tire and fly line innovator and stuff. And so it's a multi-density Skagit head. It's like 1.5 foot of floating going into I think it's 15 feet of intermediate and then 6 feet of type 3. And it's all integrated into the same Skagit head, which is 23.5 feet, I think, or something around that. Off of that, I started thinking, why am I fishing 12.5 feet of T11 when my Skagit head is on a decline, and then I've just got this level chunk of sink tip? And, if it wasn't super deep, or if I fished any weighted fly at all, I was hanging up on the inside. So I was getting deeper on the outside. And it does slow your fly down. It's not a line that is supposed to get super deep. It's supposed to cut through a lot of hydraulics and currents and stuff like that. But so it got me thinking, why am I doing this? So I started, I'd build all this, or I used to build all the sink tips at Northwest Fly Fishing Outfitters, and we would have these bulk spools. Well, at the end of it, when you got down to it, you'd have these little stitches of 3 feet or 5 feet or whatever. And, I can't build a 10 or 12 foot tip out of that. So I kind of just stockpile them. And so then I started cutting them up and trying different lengths and all different stuff. So here's the recipe, because I tried to have Airflow build them. I tried to have Rio build them, and, Airflow was going to build them. Then they got bought by Mayfly, and Rio told me it wouldn't work, even though I've been fishing them for, 2 years or whatever. And this is all I do for a living, but I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. So here's the recipe. It's 2 feet of T8. And then on top of that, you have 7.5 feet of T11. And then you have 3 feet of T14. And so you get level tubing, about a stitch about maybe 6 inches long. You overlap those tips 4 inches, get a heat gun, melt it, roll it out, cut the level tubing off, you're in business. Now here's the thing. This is what people can't understand. Don't attach the T14 to the Skagit head. Flip it around. Attach the T8. This is the problem that the companies had. They're like, but Eric, the diameter of T8 is too thin for the Skagit. And I said, I don't care. It doesn't matter if you think it's too little. I'm telling you, I fish it all the time. No one ever casts a Skagit and somebody's like, damn, you see that laser beam, beautiful, just picture perfect artistic cast. No, it's a means to an end. How can I get this half a chicken down 6 feet in the wintertime? Right.
Yep.
That's what I want to do. So
through the craziness, no less. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, people chucking duck back in the day. Now we got lines that do stuff really well, but yeah, it's still, obviously I'm getting hot thinking back. So it makes me crazy when people that do stuff for a living are like, hey, I got this great idea. And then other people are like, yeah, but when I write it out, it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, I'm sorry if it doesn't make sense. I'm telling you it works. I'm getting off track. So
yeah, you hear my nephew's a machinist, and I hear him have the same conversation. The designer wants me to do this. He builds it on CAD, says it should do, and I'm telling him you can't do that in the shop, or it takes this many more hours to do it that way. And yeah, I get it.
Yep,
that's totally it.
Yeah. So it ends up being a 12.5 foot sink tip. Attach the T8 to the end of your fist line, and then just your favorite whatever tip at 3 feet of 15-pound maximum or 20 or whatever you want to fish. And then the beauty of it is you can fish really light flies. So I fish a lot of tube flies. I do stick a little extra small raw weight in my tube flies. I think it helps us break the water tension when it first gets on the water. Mm-hmm. But it's still ultra light. I mean, there's nothing to it. So instead of trying to huck like a squidro with large dumbbell eyes or something that's got tons of tungsten in there, that's what makes the casting really hard. It's not so much the sink tip. If you put 15 feet of T14 on there, yeah, it's going to be hard. But with this multi-density tip, it's not that hard with a lighter fly. And the key to getting a good cast and getting a lot of length on it is just all you have to do is just add, go back to Skagit Master 1 with Ed Ward, that 45 thrust. I don't teach it because you don't need it with the new lines and all the new rods. But in this specific instance, as you make your sweep, if you jam it a little bit, that's what just loads that rod a little bit extra to get that tip doing what you want it to.
So I'm not much of a spey caster. Can you dive into that just a little bit to kind of give us a little more of a visual on that?
Sure, absolutely. So, without getting too into the way I teach spey casting, I break it down in the simplest, easiest form ever. If you're doing something that works for you, I don't care if no one's done it before. If you're not going to hook yourself and you get a good cast out of it, fantastic. But when I teach it, it's like, we're going to cast this way. If you make a bad cast, you should be able to use your eyes and your ears to listen or see what you did wrong. And then you can diagnose and be like, oh, Eric said when I hear this big suction sound, it's from as I sweep around, I lower my rod tip. So I diagnose the problem. How do I correct it? Just put your eyeballs on the rod tip. So as you sweep around, you can watch it go up. Okay. But the thing about what I was just talking about with adding a little bit more speed is with the new lines and rods, you can do like your motions, you can go so slow. So like equate that to a single hand rod. A lot of the new rods are faster and faster action, just meaning stiffer. Mm-hmm. But that allows you to really generate really quick line speeds, especially fishing in the wind or fishing in salt. But if you fish like a fiberglass rod, growing up, how slow you can make everything. So with the new rods and lines, especially with Skagit specifically, your motions can go so slow that as you sweep that rod around and you form the D loop, which I'm getting class 5 nerd on this stuff right now, but as that forms, all you need to do is just accelerate to a stop by pulling on that bottom hand, stopping your rod tip high, and you're going to get 50 feet easy. Yep. If you do it right, you'll probably get 70 or 80 without trying. Now that's with a Skagit switch or whatever, one of those new Rio Max Powers or the SA1 that Sylvie designed. But having that chunk of T14 at the end of your sink tip, that 3 foot, it just doesn't want to come out of the water that easy. Yeah. So as you sweep around, if you just give it a little juice, it's going to bend your rod that much more. And then the forward stroke is still the same. You don't have to really power it out because you've just loaded that rod a little bit extra.
Gotcha. You're like preloading it. I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the only tweak that you got to do to make that happen. And, we talked about, what do you want to do as a guide? You want to make your guys a better angler, level up. So that's not something that is day one, like, hey, you're winter steelheading, take this combo and try to make it work.
Right.
That's to the guys that have been fishing with me, 1, 2, 3, 4 seasons, whatever it is, to get them to that point where I know they can handle it and I can explain it to them and be like, hey, this is how you make this work. Apply the power here and do it. And, there's a couple guys out there that fish that, they call it the Mega Men. If I get them in a run, they're like, Mega Men? I'm like, it. Like, there's a run. There's a run on the Clackamas. It's called Dead Horse. It's over 15 feet deep. And, people, they get in there and they catch the fish on the inside if they're the first person through. But there's a second bucket that's just off this ledge that is almost on the other side of the run. And if you can jack, and this is level up stuff, right? If you can jack 20 or more poles of running line in that setup and mega mend it and get 10 seconds of free fall, if there's a fish down there, it's going to eat it. And it's the best eat ever because you're just watching that fly line and that sink tip disappear.
Yeah.
And then as soon as it comes tight, the fish I've hooked there is as soon as that fly comes tight, it swings for like 1 second and they're just, they hammer it.
Yeah. I mean, and just you're deep with a fish on and that line's just like cheese cutting across the river.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's speed. A lot. Yeah. And it's a lot of weight, and those are bigger fish that hold and that stuff. So
that's cool.
Yeah. The whole just chuck it out and Jesus take the wheel. If there's a fish there, they're going to eat it. That's the biggest BS in steelheading ever. Guy, if anyone tells you like, oh, if they're there, they're going to eat it, then they haven't been around enough fish. Because I've been around 6,000 coho before and we catch 100 of them. But what happened to the other 5,900? I mean, the ocean's right there. They're wild fish. It's overcast. How come those fish aren't eating?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer. But to think that one steelhead in a run is going to eat a fly as soon as it sees it, it's stupid. It's not smart. Yeah.
That is definitely the details we were looking for. I'm sure there's a bunch of people drooling out there right now. I know I am. Let's take a break from the steelhead and the spey casting, two-handers, etc. And let's talk a little bit about what you've been doing new in your area, which is this kind of flats carp fishing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, if you would have told me that I'd be talking to you in 2021, just jacked to go chase carp, I would have just been like, nah, man, there's 1,000% that's not happening. I love the two-handed stuff so much. Steelhead, they're gorgeous. The places you get to fish for them, are some of the prettiest places I've ever been. But the sad fact is like, people want to fish for other stuff, especially after the last couple winters. I'm looking forward to this winter for sure, as I always do, but there's so many other species to fish for. So, I started playing around a couple of years ago. My buddy Pete Gadd kind of got me into it, and he showed me some carp fishing spots, and it's kind of dirty water. Sometimes it was clean. It was pretty fun. Smaller fish, 4 to 8 pounds maybe. And then, fall and winter would hit, and I'd forget about them. And then the next year I'd start, cruising around the Willamette or driving out the 84 in the Columbia. But it didn't really dig its nails in me, right off the bat.
Yep.
Until I got a power boat. And I started ripping around out there and just, looking at Google Earth till, my eyes are bleeding, and then just going out and looking at a different spot. So over the last maybe year, and really this summer, I kind of put guiding on hold for multiple reasons: the heat wave, and just the fact that I need to put some days under my belt. I haven't really taken any trips July or August. And the program out there on the stuff that I found is, it's all I want to do now. I can't stop chasing carp. Out here, they're in crystal clear water. You can, in my boat, I've got a pulling platform. So I'm up there, I'm a flats guy now, bro. That's my joke. That's everybody. My girlfriend's just like, quit buying sun shirts. I'm just like, no, I'm going to buy 6 more sun shirts.
Sun shirts, bingo visors, flip-flops.
Yeah, I have dude, I have the worst hand on my foot you've ever seen. I'll take a picture and send it to you later. It's just a square somewhere in these stupid TiVos. Anyways, I'm getting off track. They'll be in a foot of water tailing, crystal clear, and you can get so close to them when they're mudding. They just have horse blinders on. They're super hard to catch. They'll run up on it. I haven't permit fished, but I've heard stories from buddies. They'll run up on it like that, tip their tail, look at it, and just go, nah, and just bail. You move the wrong way, they spook. You land the fly too close, they spook. You land the fly too far away, they spook. You don't do anything, and I was telling you this earlier, and a fish that's 50 feet away will spook, and it runs right to the fish that you're trying to target, and it spooks that fish. So,
tattletales. Gotta hate them.
If you like frustrating things, give me a shout. Have I got the thing for you? So, started out steelheading. I've kind of got into tiger muskie fishing a little bit, and now carp, and they all kind of have that common bond of like, they're really hard to catch.
Yeah.
Which I really like. But the whole sight fishing aspect has just been so much fun. Being up on the platform, being able to call, fish out, trying to get different angles. There's a ton of them out there. Average day that I've taken friends or longtime clients just playing around out there, we'll see between 30 and 100 maybe in a day.
Are you seeing them in small pods, big pods? How are they typically lining up for you?
Yeah, so like I'm not an expert. I'm sure there's people that have fly fished for carp that are listening to this, and they're like, this dude doesn't know jack. And maybe I don't. But
if you're listening and you're an expert, how about giving this guy a call? We'll get his contact out here. Boost him up a little bit, give him some info. And
So we're putting fish to the board, so it's happening. But yeah. What I've noticed is that any fish that are cruising in schools, you're not going to hook them. They're going somewhere. They're going to eat. So they've got somewhere in mind that they are traveling to.
Right on.
Once in a blue moon, if you get the perfect cast on the lead fish and it's just, it's dropping just at the right angle, they'll move over and suck it in. But for the most part, I don't target those fish.
Okay.
Then you'll have like groups of maybe two, and I call them browsers. You can almost see their head kind of bobbing back and forth, and they're going pretty slow, and they're angled a little bit down. They're not actually mudding, but you could tell like they're looking for something to eat. Those are probably the hardest fish because they're really spooky. So you got to get the cast just right. And then everybody's favorite, tailing fish. You could throw an M80 next to them. They're not going to do anything. They're in it. But what I also have noticed is that you have a very small window. The fish on the Columbia that I've seen, and again, no expert, you get about 10 seconds. They're really like, what's the word I'm looking for? They're just really good feeders. Like if they sense something's there, they get in there and root it up in under 10 seconds. I mean, they're efficient. So once they tip their tail, that time clock's going. It's like, okay, get that cast off. And, it's been a learning curve for me. And I've just been yelling at my friends and my clients. It's like, okay, 10 o'clock, 20 feet, he's tailing right now. And they're like, oh, I got to get the fly off the rod. And now the line's in the freaking trolling motor. And, we call it Axl Rose in Alaska, where guys are just casting, but they're just dancing on top of the bow, just feet together and their little short shorts, just sweet child, man. You're just like, get that fly in the water.
Right.
And by the time they throw their 6 false casts, it's like, yeah, that fish spooked 4 false casts ago.
That was James Johnson up at the Katmai Trophy Lodge taught me that. I was down at Belize when they owned the blue bonefish. And, he's like, dude, it's 1-2 fly on the water. That's where you got to get to. If you can't do it now, that's where you're aiming for. So start working your way down. And because I was 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm on, there it is. Oh, but he's like, no, you got to be flying hand, line out. So you got enough weight in the line to flex the rod and get that energy out of the rod. And it's 1-2 and it's dropping.
100%. Yep. That's exactly the same exact plan out there. And if you do that, you still can, miss the shot, but
you can have the foot brake on any cast.
But those fish too. And this is, presentation wise, there's a guy out here, he's been doing it forever. This guy, John Montana. He's the one that kind of showed me the way to present the fly to it is you want to cast across that fish, not across its back, like in front of it, maybe a foot, but a foot or two past it so it doesn't spook it. And as you drag that fly on the surface, you want it to drop just off to the side of their head because their eyes are on the side of their head. So if you drop it right in front, that's kind of their blind spot. They can't really find it.
Which makes sense with what you were talking about, the seesawing kind of cruisers,
Yeah, how they're going back and forth, right? Yeah. So if you can get it to drop to either side of their head, you'll see them just move to it and just flare their gills, suck it in. And it's like, oh, this is great. And they average, out there, they're anywhere from, we've caught them as small as 6 pounds. And I've seen fish over 20, but the biggest we've boated was like 16.5 and one was 17, I think. My buddy Colby Olson got the other day. So
I've seen these carp. I mean, they're not like belly carp, is the way I would describe it. These guys are like muscular, big carp.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, they're in the Columbia. It's current. There's current there, and they've got big shoulders and they're clean. Like a lot of the fish I was catching on Savi's Island, they're just all like scarred up and like chunks missing out of them, and it's just they're kind of gnarly. I don't want to give them too much flack, but no, these fish there's really dark ones. There's really bright ones that you're looking in the sand and you're like, it's crystal clear with 100% sun. And you're like, is that a fish? I can't tell. Like, how can I not tell? And then you're right on top of them and it spooks. And you're like, okay, that was a very bright colored fish. And then, other ones you can see from 150 feet away, just big, dark, mud marlin cruising through looking for food.
That's cool. But we kind of dove into this conversation. Can you describe the landscape and, where you're fishing? Because I'm not familiar with the marshes and the flats up there.
Sure. So, without going out there, that's a great question because people would think, oh, like, yeah, it's like marshy or they're like in these big back pools. It's not the case. Where I'm fishing is Maine, Columbia. So I don't even know how many hundreds of yards wide. It's a giant river. It's crystal clear. In some of I call them cul-de-sacs, or you can call them ponds or whatever, just cutouts in the bank. If it's got weeds in there and the fish are mudding around, it could have a little tint on it for sure. But it's still, you can see to the bottom, so you're seeing the fish. They want to be in kind of a muddy, weedy bottom, but I found them on the edges where it's just straight sand. So that's going to be part of the program next year, is kind of figuring out areas where I could beach the boat on an island and actually get out and walk a flat like you're in Mexico or Belize or something. Less fish on those. More of them want to be where all the food's at, right? Where all the mud and the bushes are. But yeah, the landscape is, giant mountains in the background, green forests, tons of trees. It's gorgeous. You take a look around, it's just blue skies, clear water. It's Oregon. It's just green.
And then does it gradually get deeper, or is it a more aggressive drop off?
It's kind of gnarly. Like, it's definitely, there's a pucker moment running your boat out there, because most of the big obstructions are marked, but like you'll be going and you're in 60 feet of water. And if you know how to read water, you'll be like, man, that looks like a shallow bar up ahead, because it's tidal influenced.
Right.
And so you kind of slow down and turn, and you're like, oh shit, like I'm in 16 inches of water in the middle of nowhere.
Right. Alone.
It's definitely, you want to kind of go slow at some spots. And I definitely have taken my time going through some areas. There's just big rock, and the same thing on the Willamette. You get above the falls, and a lot of that water is, 12 feet or less. And there's chunks of rock that aren't marked, and deadheads and all sorts of stuff that there's definitely some anxiety. I was telling this to my buddy out there, it's kind of cool. People have been chasing carp forever. They've been doing it since like the 80s probably. There's a YouTube video that just came out like a month ago with Skip or Flip Pallet and Lefty Cray, and they're carp fishing. And Lefty takes Flip out, and Flip's just like, this is amazing. Like, why have you been keeping this, yourself? And it's like a video that's like 30 years old.
Yeah.
But for me and what I'm doing, I don't know anybody that really does it out here a lot. So I can't lean on anybody to help me figure it out, which sucks, and is also really fun and interesting. So like every time I go out, it's like, I got some spots marked on a GPS. I got my, oh shit, Garmin, stuff hits the fan, I could, emergency out of there. And just, a lot of trial and error. And there's definitely been more error than success. But just this last, like maybe 2 months, it's really turned around, really started to put a nice program together. It's sweet, man. I absolutely love it. I just, we talked about earlier, redfish being fisherman friendly. And if you're going to go saltwater fishing, there's no better training ground. I agree 100%. But if you can't get to Louisiana, and you're like, hey, I've got, and you live in Oregon, and you're like, yeah, I could get away for 6 hours. It's like, dude, it's been so hot and sunny here. It's like, you're going to get good, because the days I've spent carp fishing, 100% harder than the days I've spent red fishing. And that's not a bonus. I'd rather have it easier, but it just isn't.
Yeah. No, it's different type. It's good. I like it. And, you can do that on lakes, here in Utah, we've got great carp fishing.
Everywhere. You don't need to have a boat to have fun. There's all different levels of carp fishing. You can find so many places in Oregon, Washington, California, anywhere where there's warm water, their optimum feeding temp is, somewhere between 73 and 86 degrees.
Yeah.
And right now it's
my perspective is any day fishing for fish is better practice, training, technique, whatever you want to call it, than going to a park and casting the hula hoops.
Yeah, agreed. Right. At least you're in the water. And,
right. You're in the water. You're dealing with natural elements. You're actually seeing a fish and casting to it, hopefully, or there's all those other elements that come into play. You're on the boat, feeder in the line, all those things.
Yeah, you're out there fishing instead of casting. So yeah, that's a good point. I built my own website last year, just flyfishportland.com, pretty self-explanatory, but the idea behind that website was exactly that. The last 10 years, I have literally beat my head against the wall trying to catch steelhead 24/7, 365. And, hats off to the guys that do it still, but it's like, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm not going to go out when it's 100 degrees and try to swing up a steelhead. I know that's not the conditions for it. You get out there early, yeah, you have some really good luck, especially on some of the rivers here. But the idea with that whole Fly Fish Portland thing is like, say you're like, hey, Eric, I know I got a couple days coming off in late June. I'm going to come out and fish with you. Because not everybody's a guide and can be like, hey, I can take, days off whenever. I just won't make money, but I'll take the day off.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people got to schedule stuff. So, you pick June 8th, whatever. Well, you come out and it's June 7th and we look at the weather report and it's like June 8th is supposed to be super overcast, humid, chance of rain, but 84 degrees. We are not going carp fishing. We are probably going to go fish the Mackenzie and crush PMDs all day, right? The hatches are going to be going off. Or you look at the weather for the next day and it's like, oh, you just got one of those June showers. It's going to be like a high of 62, 70% chance of rain, cloudy. It's like, we're going to go chase early summer runs in Chinook on the Clack. Or it's 100% chance of sun, no clouds and light winds. It's like, well, let's go chase carp. So whenever somebody says, oh, like we had bad weather, it's like, no, you just had bad weather for the fish you were trying to catch. If you would have pivoted and used the weather that it's good for fishing, you would have probably had good fishing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes that much sense. So instead of fighting Mother Nature for all these years, I'm just like, I'm going to lean into her and just let her decide what species I want to target that day.
Very cool. Quite observant. So you mentioned a couple of ways they get a hold of you. I know there's a few more. Why don't you run through those real quick?
Well, you mentioned my eHarmony site, so that's a new one for 2022. The easiest way, Instagram's great. You can just find me at Mykesia, just MYKIZHA. I know that's probably not the easiest one to remember, but it's what I got. And then you can find me at flyfishportland.com. Gonna hopefully be doing more kind of blog stuff every couple months and just kind of summarizing what I got going on. And then, of course, you can always check out the shop. On Instagram, it's at NWFFO. If you just Google search Northwest Fly Fishing Outfitters, it's going to be on there. We're going to probably restart Friday Night Flies sometime this fall. We don't really know how we're going to get back into it. We kind of want to do some different stuff rather than just fly tying. It might be interview based, or it might be like a thing that we actually have at the shop and, have a bunch of, beer and food and I don't know, but that's probably the easiest ways to, if you're looking for more stuff. Usually my Instagram, I'm just doing really stupid stuff. So if you're looking for like informational stuff, that's probably not it. There's a lot of yelling that goes on my page. So if you're into a grown man just yelling at his phone, like check me out.
Sweet. That's a great way to get a hold of you. I noticed too, you're what, a G Loomis ambassador, I think Hatch as well. And then you do some work with Scientific Angler.
I do. Yeah. So again, without sounding too cheesy, I'm so grateful. Like I just totally humbled by the last, 5 or 6 years when Loomis approached me, I kind of like tried to talk him out of it. I was like, oh yeah, this guy guides on the coast, he's really good. He'd be a good fit. This other guy, I know, and they're just like, yeah, like, no, we want you to bring you on. Yeah.
No, that's flattering, dude. That's really cool to hear.
And they're such a good team. Everybody from Larimer to Red, the reps, Jacob, those dudes their programs are so tight, and all the ambassadors are so specific. Like they are all so determined and their programs are so dialed. I went on that Midwest tour with Red for 2 weeks, and to see, people like Eric, I always mess up his last name, Grajewski, Kyle Zempel, his Crash Camp, Schultze and his, shop and their program. And then of course, the big dog, Chris Willen, all of them, they all have that just crazy drive.
Yeah.
And so I'm everybody I'm sure is like, oh, I love the team I'm with, but I no BS. These dudes are rock solid. And I'm super happy to be with them. And then, obviously Hatch, it's just, they're if you want the reels that aren't going to fail, get on that stuff. And I usually deal a lot with Katie. She's been a huge help with everything, and she's just an awesome human being that is always taking care of me. And then the team at SA is badass too. I mean, they just picked up Sylvia a couple of years ago for fly line design, and you got Blaine out there doing all his crazy stuff. So I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm like running around trying to get autographs with the guys that I'm like part of teams with. I'm just like stoked to be affiliated with people like that.
That's too cool. Well, here I want to take a quick break to hear our sponsors again. But when we get back, what I would like to do is really rip right down through your setup for your carp fishing. You and I kind of talked about that a little bit in the past, and I think there's some pretty good value on that. So let's take a break, hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with Eric. Angler's Coffee. We love fueling your next cast. We've been roasting coffee before coffee was cool. www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish. Coming soon. Pre-register now and get notified. www.dupafish, that's DUPEAfish.com. And Togen's Fly Shop, a family-owned business for all your fly tying needs. That's Togen's Fly Shop, TOGENS, flyshop.com. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Again, if you aren't subscribed, please subscribe. Keep us on the regular, share with your friends, and let's get back into the action here. We have Eric Leinenger on the line. Eric works up in the Northwest. He's been a guide in various locations, and as he described, started out kind of bass fishing, got into more and more trout or salmonoid fishing, and lots of two-hander stuff, and then recently, for lack of a better term, discovered and really built his own kind of program around targeting carp up off of the Columbia River in the Portland area. So, Eric, before we left, the one thing I asked you to do is really let's break down this setup for your day. Really, how are your targeting, how you're getting the location, maybe a little bit about your boat and how it's set up, and then these are the types of flies I'm throwing, and here's my rod and line setup.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. One of the first things is I heard Mike Schultz on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and I really respected it because he's like, look, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm using, exactly where, the areas we're fishing and stuff, because he's so far ahead that he's just like, the knowledge point is like, you can't match it. Now, I'm not near that, but I have no problem telling exactly what I use because I want people to catch fish. So they don't have to go with me, but there's enough carp out there for everybody. Let's break it down. If you're just getting into it and you're not used to throwing kind of heavier rods, the IMX Pro 7-weight streamer rod or the IMX Pro 8-weight streamer rod by Loomis you can't really go wrong. If you want a little bit more of a hot rod, the ass width in the 7-weight it's so much fun. I mean, it's really good for tight little shots. If the wind comes up though, it punches through, and it's ultra light, so you can just hold on to it and fish it all day. As far as lines, the Infinity, or not Infinity, Jeremiah just sent it to me. It's a SA smooth, and it's basically the amplitude.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm using it in a 9-weight. It's pretty much the new fly line that I like. Before, I was using all sorts of stuff. I try like an Outbound or a Grand, and so, that amplitude is just a little bit softer because the flies that we're throwing aren't giant. So you don't need this big, super weight forward over line size by, 3 times.
You're fishing a cold water line.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe in the heat of August, you might have to swap over to, like maybe even like a summer redfish line or something like that would be applicable. But yeah, exactly. But we'll get to that once the temperatures rise up.
And you said you're fishing a 9-weight line. Are you fishing that on a 9-weight rod as well, or are you overlining, underlining scenario? Oh, yeah. Good.
I should probably clear that up. So, you're just matching it for what it is. So 7 weights, if you're starting out, I fish a 9 just because a lot of times if I'm just out there fishing by myself, I'll bypass some of the smaller fish and just – they're so strong, man. Like even like an 8-pound fish is going to kind of wear you out. So after a couple, you're kind of like – I can kind of just sit here and have a beer because I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
So I'll just hunt for the big ones. So the 9s are really good because they're all head. They're like a redfish. So to try to turn them, you kind of need some power back there.
Right. And
So
you're running, I would assume, heavy enough tippet that you're really using the backbone on the rod. It's not like you're tippet limited, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll have to go down to 12, but I build my own leaders. And so it's like, it's 30 to 25 to 20 to 16, and that's all fluorocarbon. And it's like a 7.5-foot leader because it's pretty tight shots and you're not fishing super deep water.
Yeah. Yeah, just to put a little background on that, I mean, I just take that from trout fishing because you hear people all the time like, you need a 5-weight rod for those fish. You can't, it just doesn't have enough power, doesn't have this. And then you go, well, wait a minute. You're fishing a 5-weight rod. You need more backbone. You need more of this, that. But your tippets, you're fishing a 6X or 5X. Like that's your weak point. That's going to break far before you get into your backbone of your rod.
Yeah, exactly.
Real hard.
Yeah, it doesn't add up. The story's not checking out, right? You're like, what kind of, rationale is that? So,
and it works the opposite direction at that point. Like if you're fishing really light tippet, you actually want a longer, softer tipped rod to help with that scenario. So
yeah, that's your shock absorber, right?
Yep.
So yeah, the 9 weights, like the NRX Plus Salt, it's just a badass rod. That's another Loomis rod. But the one I'm super excited about, and I'm not going to, again, I love the term blown smoke up skirts. I don't know why, but it's something I always use. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The T2S that's coming out like this week, I have not thrown, full disclosure. So I can't tell you it's the best rod on the market, but I am so excited to fish that rod because it's essentially a 1-piece rod. So what they did with that rod is like, it's a 2-piece, but the first section is like just a little bit higher than the cork there. And then the rest of the rod plugs into that. So there's finally a 1-piece rod that you can like travel with. And if you've ever thrown a 1-piece rod, you're like, why do they even make them in 4-piece? Well, it's to put them on a plane. They don't fish better being in more pieces. It's not the way it works. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked to get that stick in my hands, and that will probably be my go-to. We talked about leaders, talked about lines. Let's talk about flies. Hats off to John Montana again. I got to give credit where it's due. I ripped off his fly. There it is. It's out there. It's called the hybrid. I tie them on a MFC heavy wire scud hook. And I usually tie them on a 10 or a 12, but the fish are kind of big. So 10. And then I just started tying some on a size 8 to see if they'll eat them, because it's actually, there's a big difference between the 10 and the 8 with the gap in the hook and the actual diameter of the wire. It's a lot beefier. If you look up his fly, it's pretty straightforward. I'll give you a little tidbits how I tweak it. You can tie them that way if you want. So starting at the hook, get a 1/8 mottled either brown or green tungsten bead, slide it on the hook. Then I use matte black bead chain eyes, about maybe an 1/8 of an inch in front of that. I use the matte black instead of gold because I've noticed as that fly is fluttering down and a fish is moving towards it, sun will catch that gold and flash. That spooks them. I mean, like I said, these fish are crazy spooky. So matte black, bead chain eyes. Then wrap your thread all the way to the back and just chenille in wine colored, in worm colored, in red colored, but the wine seems to be the ticket. And have that tail maybe like 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches long or something like that. And then as far as the body, he uses Estes. If you use that vinyl ribbing that people twist on midges in red or brown, it just allows that fly to sink faster. So that Estes, it's not as it's not aerodynamic, but it adds bulk, and so that water, as it displaces it, it doesn't allow it to sink. So that vinyl ribbing it's synthetic and it cuts right through. And then just a couple turns of like a grizzly dyed soft hackle. He uses rump pheasant. Again, it's stiffer, it's longer. I don't like it. I like the softer stuff of the grizzly hackle. And that's about it. You're good to go. One pro tip I will say, when you get that fly done tying, flip it upside down and cut the hackle on the bottom that's right against the bead chain eyes. Because as that fly flutters to the bottom, if that hackle, you don't trim it, it will cause your fly to tip on its side. So cut it off the bottom and then set that fly on a flat surface, and it should act as a tripod with that chenille tail sticking straight up, and you're good to go.
Perfect. I mean, you just gave us the tying tutorial on that one. I think I could tie it with my eyes closed now.
Yeah, they're super easy, but man, they are effective. And I've tried a bunch of other stuff, and they eat other stuff, but they really eat that guy well. And if you tie it like that, the tripod style, they sink quick, and that tail just sticks up. It's like a homing beacon. They want to eat it.
Very cool. And you were saying too, you're casting 6-8 inches in front of the nose of the fish, but also past the nose of the fish. How far? A foot or two, and then you're kind of pulling it towards the fish and letting it fall right beside them a little bit, off at a 45-ish or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, if they're really tailing, I throw it like maybe 2 feet past them, but basically, 6 inches in front of them. So as soon as it lands, you have to lift your rod and drag the line, because otherwise that tungsten bead, it sinks too quick. And that fly is so small that if it sinks and you try to strip that fly to get it in front of that fish, people have seen that 0% of the times. Like you won't see it. I don't care how good your eyes are. I got 20/10. I'm looking right at it. I can't see it. But if you cast it, as soon as it hits the water, lift your rod tip real quick and bring the rod towards you, and it drags that fly on the surface.
Yep.
So when that fish is tailing, it takes practice for sure. You drag it, and just as it passes the front of that fish, drop it. And so it falls down on an angle
on your side of the fish, right?
Yep.
Okay, I got
exactly.
You. All right. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's and I understand what you mean by the lifting and dragging. Brad Lovejoy up on the Green River here in Utah taught me that tactic, fishing cicadas, like a hopper pattern, essentially. And I remember we were floating down the river sideways, 2 guys fishing, and your line would start getting so straight that you'd start dragging your fly, and he'd be like, okay, just lift your rod tip. I'm going to control the boat, and then let the slack back down, put slack back in your line. And exactly what you mean, but it keeps that bug up high too. If you tried stripping it back to get it into position and then letting your slack back out, you had one tension in the line, and when you were stripping it back, it was just drowning the fly. So yeah, I get it.
And there's a lot of moss and weeds, even though it looks like it's a totally muddy bottom with nothing on the bottom. If you let it land on the bottom and then you try to strip it in front of that fish, you're just going to get a bunch of weeds all over your hook, and they won't eat it. So it's kind of dual purpose.
Well, Eric, I can't say enough about getting you on the podcast today and how much I've enjoyed this conversation. We haven't had too many prior to this, but I feel like I know you really well now. And I'm looking forward to making my way up there and getting out on the water with you. If you find yourself down here in Utah, by all means, definitely look me up. You got a place to stay, etc. And then let's even think about maybe meeting up down in Houma and getting some reds. Love to see you down there too.
Yeah. We talked. You're about there the same time I am, for sure. Yeah, man, this was a blast. It's really cool to hop on and pass back some information. I've had a lot of success just being able to take people out, and that allows me to do what I love to do. So yeah, it's great to hop on here and give some people some tips, and it was cool. Just shooting the shit with you for a little bit here.
You got it, my man. Well, that wraps us up for this week, everyone, on the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Y'all have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday.